Have you checked the children? Your little master.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the towers. Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That's Reezy, everybody, and obviously Bevenitos, and welcome to the horror show. This is the first time that I am getting the awesome opportunity to do a double down Hail episode. So this is one that will make its initial premiere courtesy of none other than one of our long-standing patrons, Heather Smith. So a grande gracias to you, obviously, Heather, and for your continued support. It's pretty badass and awesome, and we are humbled and honored. And yes, this is going to eventually migrate from the Patreon channel over to the main YouTube as a public video, but it will get the first go for the patrons, and this is going to be another double down as well because of the fact that a number of years ago we had the intention to cover each of the Children of the Corn installments in twosies, and so we did myself, Cecil, and Marsha Parker. We did a video that essentially covered part 1 and part 2. So the first one with Linda Hamilton from the 80s, and then we did the sequel that came out in the early 90s, which was Children of the Corn 2, The Final Sacrifice. So that was not a Hail to Stephen King episode. That was just kind of a little spin-off separate thing in and of itself. So we had intended to do 3 and 4 together, and 5 and 6 together, and so on through the rest of them. But this is very awesomely opportune because supposedly we are going to get that Children of the Corn prequel from the director of Equilibrium at some point. It was screened last year in 2020 at like a couple theaters in Florida, and then we haven't heard a peep about it since then, but it's finished and it's just sitting around. I'm assuming they're trying to secure some sort of distribution for it. It was filmed in Australia during the pandemic, and so yeah, since I imagine we're going to see that at some point within the next few months to a year, it's only befitting that Heather Smith was cool enough to basically get the ball rolling on myself finally revisiting in, I guess, what could be considered a truncated version of films that forgot the face of their father. And so I am here to talk about Children of the Corn 3, Urban Harvest, and then Children of the Corn 4, The Gathering. And so I very distinctively remember seeing both of these on the video store shelves when I was a kid and just being creeped out. I don't know what it was about being a kid and then seeing murderous children that I found so unnerving, especially because of the fact that, they're killing adults. And then even seeing something like The Good Son, for instance, that was another one that just messed me up. Elijah Wood and Macaulay Culkin, Lil K. McAllister, acting against type, that's for damn sure. And then I saw the Kristopher Reeve, rest peacefully, sir, his remake of Children of the Damned. And so, yeah, it's always been, even since growing up, something that has unnerved me. The Prude is another one with murderous little childrenish things and stuff. So, yeah, I don't know what it is, but it still kind of haunts me to this day. And so, yes, I am going to be covering 3 and 4, and with the third film, Urban Harvest, this was the first one to go direct to video, courtesy of Dimension, as opposed to in theaters like we had for part 1 and The Final Sacrifice, the sequel. And so this was where the series really started to try to position itself as being, every year or so, we'll get a Children of the Corn movie in your local video store. And boy, did they milk this one like a motherfucker, big time. It is still the most sequelized franchise of anything that we have had from Sai King. And that's kind of astounding, but I guess it really shows just the continued viability of this IP for whatever reason. And as much as Steve likes to kind of talk shit about some of these sequels and some of the adaptations or whatever, I still think he laughs to the bank to a degree about this, but he's such an awesome philanthropist that, I would imagine he is doing good things with the money from these silly sequels. But I must admit, upon revisiting both of these, and so first and foremost, the first one that Heather requested was Urban Harvest, the third film, and this is one that myself and Marsha and Cecil did watch, and then we were about to go to The Gathering, and then as the channel was ramping up and becoming more successful a number of years ago, which was around the time that we watched Urban Harvest, the Gathering just fell by the wayside. And so I found it to be relatively silly when I watched it a few years ago, but as this being my first revisit of it, I think Urban Harvest kind of holds up for as odd as it is as far as the concept goes. And so concept of this one is the fact that, so you've got this kid Eli, and he is a kid that was from Gatlin, and he ends up, after everything, went down in Gatlin, and we know how all of that sort of went, he ends up going into this foster home with this kid Joshua and his father. And so at the very beginning of the film, we see what Eli does with the power of he who, walks behind the rose does to Joshua's father, and the both of them escape, and they find themselves in foster care in Chicago of all places. So hence the title Urban Harvest, and I know, as Cecil recently mentioned to me, using the term urban for this sort of inner city kind of film, which is what it is. And, in the mid-90s, stuff like Dangerous Minds and I guess Higher Learning was, before this and stuff like that. But, it was definitely that sort of in vogue storytelling, and it incorporates it into the world of Children of the Corn. So it's a very peculiar mishmash, but I think it works most notably because of the fact that the kid who plays Eli, he is so mischievous and evil, and he puts on a pretty damn good performance for his age. He is foreboding and ominous and super evil. And so, being originally from Gatlin, without spoiling things, there is definitely some secretive craziness about his backstory and how old he might be as the social worker who actually put Eli and Joshua with this family figures out. And he's trying to keep that secret covered up. And there is this abandoned old factory which is right beside the home that he is staying in with this couple who have taken them in and adopted them. And when I was watching this with Lady Catherine, it was interesting because she was like, kids that age rarely if ever get adopted, which, yes, it's true. Check your brain in at the door in that regard. I know with the adoption process, typically parents really want a kid as young as possible, so they have the opportunity to raise it as their own and set in their lessons and precepts and indoctrination. In this particular case, I think as a word really makes a lot of sense. But I find this movie, with the exception of a few scenes, most notably where Joshua and Eli are at this new school, and they are being picked on by this rougher black kid, and then later on, Joshua, after standing up to him, goes and kind of schools some peeps on the basketball court. It's hilarious. It's the strangest and silliest scene in the entire film, that Joshua, this, kid from Nebraska who is dressed straight up Amish-esque and stuff, he just goes and starts bawling like a motherfucker in this, man, and he's passing like a badass. And I guess it's kind of appropriate that I'm wearing the Suns jersey if I'm talking shooty hoops and whatnot. But he schools a bunch of kids on this court, and he makes fast friends with this brother and sister duo who doesn't live super far from him. He strikes up a friendship with the brother, and then he strikes up a kind of romance of sorts that's blossoming with the sister. Tests their friendship a little bit, but they kind of get over it, and he's like, hey, you're a good dude, Joshua, so I'll kind of give you my blessing about my sister, so to speak. But in the midst of all of this, Eli is planting his special Nebraska corn in this nearby warehouse that's abandoned, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier. And so, he's growing this corn that is almost got mind control sort of capabilities of it, because it is imbued with he who walks behind the rose, obviously. And so Eli's also very resentful of his brother Josh because, he's starting to dress like all of the kids at the school as opposed to maintaining their prior Nebraska attire and everything. And yet, he is also kind of dissuading the father, and the father, the adoptive father, I should specify, he kind of gets in on this corn that Eli is growing, and he wants to market it to, the world, and he's like, wow, the growth rate is amazing, and it's got all of these. That's one thing that I found very interesting about this film, is it does talk about the use of pesticides and different things like that to basically amplify crop production. And so this did have at least certain things to say about, the food and, most notably, I guess, vegetable and the crop industry and stuff like that. So that was kind of cool and a little more just subtext and commentary than I was necessarily anticipating. So even after the adoptive mother dies, and it is one of the more solid kills in this, she falls on this water pipe and right through the head. So the gore is interesting on that, and the water is flowing through this pipe, and so it's spitting out of her mouth this bloody water sort of stuff. It's relatively grisly, and so I've kind of given you the vibe of the story and stuff. There is a principal at this, because it is kind of like a Catholic school, I guess, that Joshua and Eli are placed into by the adoptive parents, and so the principal, the head father, priest kind of guy, is very suspicious of Eli, especially as Eli starts using this mind control corn to get this, just contingent of followers, I guess you could say. And so, yeah, the kids are basically mobilizing, and they are preparing for a big evil hammer of sorts to come down, through the influence of Eli. And yet Joshua and his buddy and the sister are very just skeptical, and they can kind of sense the ominous evil that is on the horizon. And so, yeah, it does build to a climax that is bonkers crazy in that mini cornfield, I guess, that is inside the nearby warehouse of where Eli and Joshua are staying with the adoptive parents and stuff. But the effects are interesting in that regard. I've seen people slog them and just take them to the cleaners, because you have this creature that shows up at the end in that cornfield inside the warehouse. But I thought the design was pretty rad status, honestly. There are a few cutaway scenes and the use of, I guess, green screen or whatever they classified it as at that particular time. So yeah, the effects do look more direct to video in that regard, and there's a couple in particular where characters are being consumed by this ginormous creature that is a manifestation of He Who Walks Behind the Rose. But I enjoy the just sheer mania of that ending scene. And then there was also one a little bit earlier in the third act where they basically, Joshua and his black buddy, the brother of his love interest, they go back to Nebraska because they're trying to find this He Who Walks Behind the Rose book that Eli was using. It's a Bible of sorts, but it's a dark Bible, obviously. And there is a really cool effect that happens to a character there, where there is a head that is pulled up, and the spine is, it's very much influenced by John Carpenter's The Thing, at least the look of this particular effect and stuff, with this just head that is, a multiple amount of feet in the air based on this spine that the head is pulled out of the neck socket. It's pretty rad. This film has a lot of merits, much more than I actually remembered. I think I was focusing upon my first viewing a number of years ago of this on just the silly combination at times of the fact that this is not in actual cornfields back in Nebraska or somewhere in the Midwest. And I found that initially off-putting, I think, but in this regard, upon this viewing, yes, it is a film that forgot the face of its father to a degree, but just like I found merits in stuff like Sometimes They Come Back, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I guess Pet Sematary 2, and also Return to Salem Slot. This is not the extent of the Two Mangler sequels or anything. This actually has some interesting merits, and a creepy performance from Eli as our main evil kid. And yeah, there's a cheese factor, of course, being a direct-to-video Children of the Corn sequel, but this is definitely one of the stronger ones, I must admit. And so, Heather, I'm very glad that you started the ball rolling with Urban Harvest. And so, yes, there's no, super noteworthy faces. I guess the buddy of Josh is the brother of the love interest. I know I saw him in a decent amount of stuff in the early to mid-90s, but yeah, let's move on now to the second part of this patron request, also once again from Heather Smith, so that grande gracias. And this is number 4, that's right, Children of the Corn 1B, The Gathering. And so this one came out just about a year later in 1996. And so 95 for the third one, Urban Harvest, 96 for this one. And they were both filmed like right around the same time. And so whereas the third film, Urban Harvest, was filmed in Los Angeles, which doubled over as Chicago, apparently. This one was filmed in Austin, Texas in early 1994. And yeah, you've got none other than Naomi Watts in this. Yeah, man, Naomi Watts in her first film where she ever got top billing, and it was shot in Austin, Texas. And that, I guess that can double over maybe a little bit more easily for Nebraska. And so Naomi Watts' character is a medical student that has actually come back to her home in Nebraska where she grew up. And it's because her mother, played by none other than Karen Black, a very famous actress going all the way back to, I believe, the 50s and 60s, and she had a long, lengthy career in both larger films and independent cinema. She is Naomi Watts' mother, and she is dealing with, I think you classify it as agoraphobia? So essentially, she's like scared to death to leave her home, and then she still has kids, you know, she has a son by the name of James, and then there is a younger daughter whose name is eluding me at this particular point. But so Naomi Watts comes back from school, and she is there to kind of take care of her mother. And so this is back to the more traditional sort of vibe that you would expect from Children of the Corn. And it does, despite the fact that it doesn't have like a direct connection with previous films, I don't necessarily think that you really have to, as long as you respect a little bit of the mythology of the original short story that was published in Playboy in the 70s by Cy King. I think that this is the sort of IP that you can really play around with and alter the backstory in a at least moderately fascinating fashion. And so this, once again, I don't think it's as strong as Urban Harvest. It doesn't have effects that I found quite as good, and this different take on some of the backstory of some stuff that had happened in this area of Nebraska isn't quite as interesting, because Urban Harvest does actually kind of tie in with part 2. You've got a flashback from that doctor from The Final Sacrifice and some of the conspiracy stuff, I guess, that was going on in there. But these films, they can, if they kind of tinker with the mythology just a little bit, can stand on their own. And I would say that this one does, because you have all of the kids in this particular town in Nebraska suddenly getting sick all at the same time. They've got this weird fever going down, and they're like all sick practically. They are on the verge of death, and then suddenly the fever just dissipates, and you're trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And as you do, you find out the backstory of this kid who was basically taken in by these few evangelists, and they used him as almost like a speaking piece, but yet as a gimmick in the same right. You know, this very strong-minded and emphatic kid who could go along with them and preach and, you know, travel the area of the Midwest and stuff. But they started to realize that the gimmick will wear itself out and no longer be viable if the kid grows up. And so these nefarious fuggas decide to consult the dark arts to actually make this kid stay the same age forever, or at least, you know, until some sort of nasty thing could befall him and he's killed. But yeah, so they make this deal so that he will not age, and so they can continue milking that proverbial biblical cow, so to speak. And this is a bit of backstory that is found out over the course of the story, and it is the presence of that kid that is mobilizing and influencing all of the children in this particular town in Nebraska. So that's actually kind of cool. I mean, these kids, once they start becoming taken over by the presence of this former little minister kid, they start going by different names than their own, so they're using the older names of some prior followers and stuff like that, which is interesting. And performance from Naomi Watts is very solid. Karen Black, she doesn't have really as much to do, but she's not bad in some of the scenes, especially where she finally gets over her fear and gets behind the wheel of a vehicle as some of these hallucinations and crazy dreams she's been having start to actually become reality. One in particular with this kid that is at the very beginning of the film in a dream sequence, and he's got this thermometer in his mouth, and the mercury in the thermometer turns out to be a way to actually hurt this presence that is obviously a, you know, just a outstretch, I guess, of the he who walks behind the rose, which is the evil presence that is explored throughout this entire series. And so, yeah, the Mercury is a big thing, but yeah, Karen Black finally gets over her fear and goes and ventures out. But really, Naomi Watts is, you knew she was going to become a star seeing something like this. I was reading on Wikipedia that she only paid like $5,000 to be in this movie. So they're like, hey, here's $5,000. You get most of the screen time. You get top billing, and she's great at it, man. She really is, especially with the nurturing aspect where she goes back to work at the private practice with this doctor who is her former boss when she comes back to care for her mother. The doctor is great too in the few scenes that we get with him. The kids are appropriately creepy in all of their scenes, and I thought that was very good, especially where there's this ritual near the end of the film where they're all cutting their hands and putting it in this huge, I guess water trough of sorts is the best way that I could describe it, inside this barn. And so that's cool. The kills are not as good in this one, though, as in the previous, I must admit. And there's one scene in particular where these twins are going after a character, and they have, a hospital stretcher sort of thing. And for whatever reason, the hospital stretcher has a blade that can come out on it, and this character gets whoosh, right down the middle. And yeah, you see the separation aspect, and I guess that's cool, but yeah, so the kills aren't quite as inventive as some of the stuff that we saw in the third film, and so that's a detractor, unfortunately. But it is nice to be back in the creepiness of the more remote area. There's something about being in a major city that I think, depending on the sort of villain or enemy or evil presence or whatever that you are trying to go against, there's always been something for me about just being out in a rural area, whether it's these cornfields like you see in this film, or whether it's the forest. Since I grew up here in the deadly desert of Phoenix, Arizona, in this sprawling metropolis of the Phoenix metro area, just the isolation of being out in the middle of nowhere, I've always found that unnerving. I'm not sure why, but I'm pretty positive it has something to do with the way I was raised. But yeah, I mean, there's really no bad performances in this one either. There's nobody that sticks out like a sore thumb, like I kind of remember from some of those later entries in the Children of the Corn VOD franchise. But yeah, this is solid, nowhere near as good as Urban Harvest, at least as far as kills and stuff like that go, but it does help rope you in seeing a top talent actor in Naomi Watts before she became a big household name, as she became in the late 90s and early aughts and still is to this day. She's very talented and still continues to kick ass on screen, and she does kick ass on screen in this, especially in the third act where she really has to roll up her sleeves and go for it. Her friend, who also works at the private practice with her, is amusingly aware and self-referential. This was around the time that horror was becoming more meta, I guess, and self-aware. There's a point in the film where Naomi Watts' friend says that, with all the kids getting sick and acting strange and stuff, she's like, yo, I just don't want to be around when their heads start spinning and they're spitting up pea soup. So yeah, there is a cognizance of horror in media that you get from this film, and so I did appreciate that. The ending kind of resolves itself a little bit more so than I would have preferred. And also the fact that the end of Urban Harvest had a very cool sort of up in the air creep factor ending, with the corn having been distributed throughout the world, and who knows how many people it could influence and kind of take over their minds, and this worldwide cult of these corn killers, so to speak. And they abandoned that, unfortunately, and that's from what I understand, because it's been a number of years since I've watched all of these films. Every film, really with the exception of Part 6, which is Isaac's Return, from what I understand at least, they're all just kind of their own individual thing. But as long as you just point back to the craziness in Gatlin in some particular regard and the outstretch of the evil influence, I think that you can still make interesting stuff within the Children of the Corn franchise, and that's why I'm excited. Hopefully Heather will continue the ball rolling, and we will just keep marching along with these film entries, but I'm excited for it. I'm excited to take another peek and revisit these, and I'm also very curious to see what the Equilibrium director, because that's a damn good movie, did with that Children of the Corn prequel. So yeah, we still have a few more. The fifth one, which is also check this out. This is a 6-film set that I have here. So this has 2 through 7, if I'm not mistaken. So 5 is Fields of Terror, 6 is the aforementioned Isaac Returns, or excuse me, 666, Isaac's Return. And then you have Revelation, and then, and I think Revelation is like kind of, no, it's the one that comes after Revelation, which I think was called Genesis. That was another reboot, but a reboot from the Dimension Extreme label that you got after the Sci-Fi Channel reboot, which I think is really good. It's one of my favorite Children of the Corn films. So I hope that Heather Smith continues along with these requests, because I'm very pumped to continue along with these. But I just really hope they cut back on the dream sequences in 5 and 6 and some of the other ones, because in both 3 and 4, both The Gathering and Urban Harvest, time after time, a character has a nightmare and they wake up, and then sometimes they are still in the nightmare and it's a dream within a dream, a nightmare within a nightmare. And so it happens so much in both the 3rd and the 4th movie. So I hope they cut back on that. And I believe that David Carradine and like Ava Mendes in this? Ava Mendes and David Carradine are in the 5th one. So Heather Smith, I'm hopeful and looking forward, if you continue along with these, to just have that coverage just going right along. It's going to be a fun revisit. So I extend a grande gracias. You can find moi, Jaime and Fuego, on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube. I recently relaunched Fuegotainment, which is my solo channel for all the stuff that is not of the spectacular variety. So jump over and check that out. I've got reviews of Ridley Scott's The Last Duel, Marvel's Eternals, lots of great stuff that has come out here in the month of November 2021. And any support over there is supremely appreciated. Also here on Hail to Stephen King on The Horror Show, we do a book of the month, and if you are seeing this in the month of November, Lacey's Story is going to be discussed on the first Tuesday of December. That is the 15th anniversary of that book, which was adapted splendidly for Apple TV Plus this past year. And there's also a Hail to Stephen King Facebook group for any of you patrons. If you want to have further palaver about El Rey, that is the place to do it. I'm the sole moderator and admin there, so come over and let's have some great Kev going down. So, I've been Fuego. Heather Smith, you are the most rad status, but thanks to everybody else who tuned in, and until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, sin amigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you. Hopefully, we have been well met, and we share more of this palaver sooner rather than later, and until then, remember to stay scared and read Stephen King. If you have never read the short story that's in Night Shift, definitely check it out, but honestly, Children of the Corn 3 and 4 are actually quite the entertaining time.